The morning Jessica Morgan pulled up to the farmhouse, the Oklahoma wind was already angry, whipping dust devils across the cracked earth as if the land itself was trying to warn her away. She sat in her 10-year-old Honda Knuckles, white against the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at what her grandmother had left her: 60 acres of dried-up dreams and a house that looked like it was holding its breath, waiting to collapse. Beside her, Emma pressed her small face against the window, 8 years old with eyes too wise for her age. "Is that where Grandma Eleanor lived?" Her voice was barely audible above the wind's low howl. Jessica nodded, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. The house stood crooked against the horizon, paint peeling, like dead skin windows, clouded with decades of dust. The barn had already surrendered to gravity, its roof caved in like broken ribs. And there to the right was the chicken coop, a ramshackle structure that somehow looked even worse than the house, if that was possible. Just yesterday, Jessica had been standing in their apartment in Detroit, holding an eviction notice in one hand and Emma's birthday cake order form in the other. The timing couldn't have been crueler. The final notice arriving on Emma's birthday, forcing Jessica to lie about the party she'd promised. There'd been no money for a cake anyway, not after her ex-husband disappeared with their savings, leaving her with 2 jobs that barely covered daycare. Then the phone had rung. A lawyer from Oklahoma, with news that her grandmother, a woman she'd barely known, had left her everything she owned. The inheritance of a lifetime, a worthless patch of dirt at the end of a dirt road. They'd driven 14 hours straight, leaving behind the eviction notice taped to their apartment door. Emma had slept through most of the journey, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing eye that Jessica had sewn back on 3 times. Jessica had driven through the night, fueled by gas station coffee and the desperate hope that maybe somehow this inheritance would be enough to start over. Now, as a small dust devil spun past the car like a warning, Jessica wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The wind picked up, howling around the car, and a tumbleweed bounced across what had once been a front yard. Emma's hand slipped into hers, small and warm. "We can fix it, Mom." Her voice held the simple certainty that only children possess, the belief that anything broken can be mended with enough love and determination. Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand, wishing she shared even a fraction of that optimism. The front door wasn't even locked. It opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty rooms. Inside, everything was exactly as her grandmother had left it. Dishes in the sink, a calendar on the wall still showing March 1982, dust thick as winter snow on every surface. Why did great-grandma live here all alone? Emma ran her finger along a windowsill, watching the dust dance in the shaft of light. Jessica wished she knew. Her own mother had died when Jessica was 12, and her father had never explained why his mother-in-law lived in isolation, why she'd refused every offer of help, why she'd let the farm die around her rather than sell. Emma sneezed as more dust rose from her explorations, then froze, pointing to the floor. "Mom, look." Fresh footprints tracked through the dust, too large to belong to either of them. Someone had been here recently, walking through the abandoned house. Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft whistling through the walls. She pulled Emma closer, suddenly aware of how exposed they were, how far from neighbors or help. They spent that first day cleaning just enough to make 2 rooms livable. Jessica had brought sleeping bags, some canned food, and the wild hope that maybe somehow she could make this work. Maybe she could fix up the house, sell it for enough to start over. Maybe she could plant something in the dead fields. Maybe she could finally give Emma the stability she deserved. That night, as Emma slept beside her on the floor, Jessica stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle and moan around them. The wind whistled through gaps in the walls, and somewhere in the darkness, she heard the rusty shriek of the chicken coop door swinging on its hinges. She'd deal with that tomorrow. Tonight, she was too tired to care about anything except the fact that for the first time in months, no one could evict them. This broken-down farmhouse might not be much, but it was theirs. A sudden sharp knocking jolted Jessica from her fitful sleep. The room was pitch black, save for the thin beam of moonlight cutting through a crack in the curtains. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Emma stirred beside her but didn't wake. Jessica fumbled for her phone. 2:18 a.m. Who would be at their door in the middle of nowhere at this hour? Heart hammering, she crept to the front door, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. Through the window, she could make out a tall silhouette on the porch and the glint of what looked disturbingly like a shotgun. Her hand froze on the doorknob. The knocking came again, followed by a gruff voice. "Saw your lights earlier. Don't mean to frighten you, ma'am, but you ought to know you've got visitors." Jessica swallowed hard, weighing her options. They were miles from the nearest neighbor with no cell service. If this man meant them harm, there was little she could do. But something in the steady, matter-of-fact tone of his voice made her turn the knob. The man on the porch was older, maybe late 60s, with a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. Silver hair cropped short shoulders still square despite his age. The shotgun rested casually in the crook of his arm, pointing safely at the ground. "Frank Matthews. Live about 5 miles east. Only neighbor you've got within shouting distance." Jessica introduced herself, explained about the inheritance. Frank nodded as if this explained everything, then gestured toward the road. "Been seeing trucks from Southwest Resource driving by, taking measurements, soil samples. Thought you should know. Why would anyone take soil samples from worthless land?" Jessica's question hung in the night air between them. Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Eleanor Morgan wasn't just living here. She was guarding this place. Been that way for 40 years. Frank helped them secure the house, hammering boards over the most vulnerable windows, checking locks that hadn't been used in years. He moved with the efficiency of someone used to solving practical problems, his hands strong and sure despite their age. He told Jessica he'd been watching the property for years doing small repairs, when Eleanor wasn't looking, respecting her fierce independence, but worried about the old woman's safety. "Most folks around here thought Eleanor was just a crazy old lady, but I knew better." Frank's voice was low as he worked, almost as if he was talking to himself. She was standing guard. Question is over what Jessica helped him work, grateful for his unexpected kindness while her mind raced with questions. Why would her grandmother, a woman she barely remembered, spend her life protecting this worthless farm? And what did Southwest Resource want with the land? The next morning, Emma woke Jessica by tugging excitedly on her arm. "Mom, I found something." She was clutching an old doll. Its porcelain face cracked but still beautiful, its dress faded from what must have once been red velvet. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The doll was identical to one she'd had as a child, a treasured possession that had disappeared during one of their many moves. How could the same doll be here in her grandmother's house? While Emma played with her discovery, Jessica explored the house more thoroughly in the daylight. In what must have been her grandmother's bedroom, she found photo albums thick with dust. She sat on the sagging bed and opened one carefully. The pictures showed a woman she barely recognized. Her grandmother, young and laughing, standing in front of the same farmhouse when it was fresh and white and proud. There was a man beside her, handsome with sharp angles and serious eyes. Jessica's grandfather, who had died before she was born. In photo after photo, they looked happy. The fields were green, the barn was straight, the chicken coop was full of white hens. They were building something together, creating a life from soil and sweat and hope. But then the photos changed. Her grandfather disappeared from them. Her grandmother's smile faded. The backgrounds grew progressively more desolate, as if the land was dying along with whatever had broken her grandmother's heart. Jessica closed the album, questions multiplying in her mind. What had happened here? What had turned a thriving farm into this monument to loneliness? Through the window, she saw Emma near the chicken coop poking at something with a stick. Maternal instincts kicked in, and she hurried outside. "What are you doing, sweetie? There's a loose board." Emma pointed to the floor of the coop. "See, it moves when I push it." Jessica looked closer. The chicken coop was a disaster. Walls leaning at dangerous angles, wire mesh rusted through old feathers, and debris covering everything. But Emma was right. One of the floorboards was slightly raised, rocking when pressed. Probably just rotted through. Jessica knelt down for a better look. The board wasn't rotten. In fact, it looked newer than the others, almost as if it had been replaced at some point. She worked her fingers under the edge and pulled. A sudden knock at the front door made them both jump. Through the coop's broken window, Jessica could see a sleek black car in the driveway, nothing like Frank's battered pickup. A man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, manila folder in hand. "Stay here," Jessica told Emma, brushing dust from her jeans as she walked toward the house. "Howard Jenkins, Oklahoma Property Partners." The man's smile never reached his cold eyes as he handed Jessica his business card. Real estate was booming, he explained. Her grandmother's land, which everyone had written off as worthless, suddenly had development potential. His company was prepared to offer her $250,000, twice the market value, for the property right now, no questions asked. The offer was tempting. No, More money than Jessica had ever seen, enough to start fresh somewhere else, to give Emma the stability she deserved. But something about Jenkins' smile, the way his eyes kept darting past her to the fields beyond, made her hesitate. When she didn't immediately accept, his demeanor changed ever so slightly. "You'd be smart to take this offer, Miss Morgan. No good comes from digging into the past." Before Jessica could respond, she heard the rumble of a truck. Frank's pickup pulled into the driveway, dust billowing behind it. Jenkins' smile tightened as the older man approached, shotgun still in the crook of his arm like it belonged there. "This is private property, friend." Jenkins' voice had hardened. "Then what are you doing on it?" Frank's response was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. Jenkins' mouth opened, then closed again. He turned back to Jessica, handed her his card. "Think about my offer. It won't be on the table long." Then he was gone, gravel crunching under the tires of his expensive car. "Don't trust that snake." Frank watched the car disappear down the road. "He's Southwest's errand boy. They've been trying to buy up all the land around here for years." "What do they want with worthless farmland?" Jessica asked. Frank's weathered face creased into a smile that held no humor. "Nothing's worthless if you know what's underneath it. I should know. Used to be a geologist with the Department of Interior before I joined the Rangers." As if on cue, Emma came running from the chicken coop, excitement making her voice higher than usual. "Mom, look what I found." In her small hand was a piece of metal, dull in most places, but with an edge that caught the sunlight with an unusual blue-green glow. Jessica reached for it, but Frank's hand shot out, stopping her. "Don't touch that with bare hands." His voice had changed, all warmth gone. "That's uranium ore." Jessica stared at him in disbelief as he carefully took the fragment from Emma, using a handkerchief, wrapped it securely, and tucked it into his pocket. "We need to wash your hands right now, little lady. Then we need to check that chicken coop. Right now." Frank explained as they walked back to the coop, Emma's hands now scrubbed clean. Uranium was discovered in parts of Oklahoma decades ago, but most people didn't know about the smaller deposits. The metal Emma had found was high-grade, valuable. If there was more, where that came from? Jessica's mind raced. Could this be why the land was suddenly valuable to Southwest? Why her grandmother had lived like a sentinel? At the chicken coop, Frank examined the loose board Emma had found. "It's been replaced all right. Not 40 years ago either. Maybe 10, 15 at most." He pried it up carefully, revealing a space underneath, deliberately carved into the hard-packed earth. And in that space was a metal box, military green, with her grandmother's initials etched into the top, EM. Eleanor Morgan. Jessica's heart began to pound. She lifted the box out carefully, surprised by its weight. Emma pressed close, her eyes wide, with the kind of excitement that comes from unexpected discoveries. The box was locked, but the lock was simple, rusted. Frank found a rock and struck it once, twice. On the third hit, it broke open. Inside, wrapped in what looked like an old silk scarf, was a leather pouch. Jessica's hands trembled as she opened it, and then the world seemed to tilt off its axis. Gold. Dozens of small ingots, each one gleaming dully in the afternoon light. But that wasn't all. Beneath the pouch was an envelope, yellowed with age, her name written across it in careful script. "For Jessica. When you're ready to know the truth." Frank whistled low. "That's not just any gold. That's high-purity native gold, the kind that sometimes occurs alongside uranium deposits." He picked up one of the small bars, testing its weight. "There's maybe 500,000 here, but it's nothing compared to what a uranium deposit would be worth." Jessica could barely process what she was hearing. $500,000 in gold, hidden under a chicken coop on worthless land. It made no sense. Her grandmother had lived like a pauper in a decaying house while sitting on a fortune that could have changed everything. With shaking fingers, she opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Jessica." The letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I could never bring myself to use or speak of. This gold was not stolen, though many would say it was. It is not cursed, though it brought me nothing but sorrow. It is simply the price of a choice I made long ago, and now that choice passes to you. Your grandfather David was not the farmer everyone believed him to be. He was a geologist sent to survey this land for Midwest Energy in 1959. What he found instead was a uranium deposit that could have made us wealthy beyond imagination. The land was ours. The rights were ours. The future was ours. But on the day we were to sign the papers to begin mining, a man came to our door. He worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and he carried documents I had never seen. Proof that this land had been stolen from the Osage Nation in 1921, taken through forged documents during the Reign of Terror when Osage people were murdered for their mineral rights. My own father had been part of it, though I never knew. The man's name was Thomas Eagle. He didn't want money. He wanted justice. He was Osage, and his grandmother had been killed for this land. He showed us the proof, photographs, testimonies, records that had been hidden for decades. The uranium deposit sat on sacred ground, a place where his people had buried their dead for generations. David wanted to fight it. He said we owned the land legally, that the past was the past. But I looked at the pictures of the murdered families, read the testimonies of children who'd watched their parents die for oil rights, and I knew I couldn't build wealth on such sorrow. We made a deal. Thomas and his family would be given time to document everything to build a legal case to reclaim the land. In exchange, he helped us extract enough gold and uranium to ensure we could leave, start over somewhere else. "One box for us," he said. "The rest stays in the ground." But David couldn't let it go. The night before we were to leave, he went back for more. Thomas caught him at the deposit, and in the struggle, I can't write what happened next. I've lived with it for 40 years, and the weight never lessens. David died that night, and Thomas helped me bury him beneath the old oak tree. He could have turned me in, could have taken everything. Instead, he helped me hide the truth and told me to leave. But I couldn't. This land had taken everything from Thomas's family, and now it had taken everything from mine. I felt I had to guard it to make sure no one else ever found what lay beneath. I sent you and your mother away to protect you from this truth, from the burden of knowing. Thomas died 5 years ago. His son Michael knows the story. He's waiting for you to contact him. His number is at the bottom of this letter. The gold in this box is yours to do with as you choose. It's worth enough to change your life. But know this, the deposit is still there, larger than anything you can imagine. And the land still belongs to the dead, both Osage and your grandfather. All of us bound together by greed and sorrow and choices that echo through generations. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandmother you deserved. I'm sorry I chose ghosts over the living. But now you must choose. Take the gold and run, or stay and face the truth that this land demands. All my love and regret, Eleanor Morgan. Jessica read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her bones. Emma sat quiet beside her, somehow understanding this moment was too big for questions. Frank stood silent as well, his weathered face unreadable. The afternoon sun climbed higher, heating the red earth, making the gold in Jessica's lap flash like accusations. A fortune built on blood, a secret wrapped in sacrifice, a choice between wealth and justice that had destroyed her family once already. She looked at her daughter, at her innocent face and trusting eyes, and wondered what kind of legacy she wanted to leave. Frank broke the silence first. Those Osage murders were real. Called it the Reign of Terror. White men married Osage women for their head rights, then killed them for the mineral wealth. The government looked the other way. Some say it was the birth of the FBI when they finally investigated. Jessica struggled to process what she was hearing. Her grandfather, a secret geologist, not a farmer. A uranium deposit worth millions. Her grandmother living as a sentinel to protect a secret that had cost her everything. And now Howard Jenkins and Southwest Resource circling like vultures, somehow knowing what lay beneath the worthless dirt. The gold could solve everything. Private school for Emma, a real home, security, freedom from the crushing weight of poverty. Or it could be the beginning of another 40 years of guilt. Jessica carefully placed the gold back in the pouch, her mind spinning. She needed to know more and needed to understand the full truth before she could decide anything. Frank cleared his throat. Southwest doesn't just want your land. They've been buying up parcels all around here. I've been watching them for years, trying to figure out what they're after. Now we know. Jessica found her voice at last. How much could the uranium be worth? Frank's eyes met hers, steady and serious. With today's prices, the deposit your grandmother's letter describes could be worth 30, maybe 40 million. But that's just what they found in the 50s. Modern equipment could locate much more. We could be talking hundreds of millions. Emma, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. Is that why the man in the suit wanted our house, because of the treasure? The innocent question hung in the air between them. Yes, Jessica finally said. That's exactly why. Through the broken coupe window, she spotted a dark SUV moving slowly down the road, stopping briefly before continuing on. Frank noticed it too, his expression hardening. They're watching. Have been since you arrived. They know something's here, but not exactly what or where. Jessica felt exposed, suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't since her ex-husband had cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. What do I do? First, we call Michael Eagle. Frank's voice was calm, practical. He needs to know what's happening. Then we figure out just how big this deposit is and what your legal options are. The Osage Nation has been fighting for decades to reclaim what was stolen from them. This could be the evidence they need. Jessica found her phone, dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. It rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. Michael Eagle speaking. This is Jessica Morgan. I think you've been waiting for my call. There was a long pause. Then I've been waiting for 40 years. How much do you know I found my grandmother's letter in the gold? Just the 1 box. Another pause. Then you haven't found the rest. Good. Can you meet me? There are things that can't be said over the phone. Jessica agreed to meet him that afternoon at a diner in town. She spent the hours until then walking the property with Emma and Frank, seeing it with new eyes. Every hill could hide a fortune. Every shadow could conceal a secret. The land itself felt different now. Not dead, but waiting. Frank pointed out the old oak tree mentioned in the letter where her grandfather presumably lay buried. Strange markings had been carved into its trunk decades ago. Osage symbols, Frank guessed, meant to protect the dead. As they prepared to leave for the meeting, Frank insisted Emma stay behind with his wife. It's not safe. Southwest has eyes everywhere. His tone left no room for argument. Jessica agreed, though it broke her heart to see Emma's disappointed face as they dropped her at Frank's modest ranch house a few miles away. On the drive to town, Frank shared more of his own story. He joined the Army Rangers after college, served for decades, then returned to Oklahoma to retire. But his background in geology had drawn him back into consulting work, and including a brief stint with Southwest Resource. That's when he'd started to suspect something wasn't right. Soil samples disappearing, land purchases that made no economic sense, pressure tactics against elderly landowners. I knew your grandmother was hiding something, just didn't know what. He kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. She'd chase me off with a shotgun whenever I got too close to that chicken coop. Jessica smiled despite herself imagining the fierce old woman defending her secret. Why did you stay watch over her all those years? Frank was quiet for a long moment. Because she reminded me of someone. My wife's mother. Same kind of strength. The kind that bends but never breaks. As they approached the town, Jessica noticed a black SUV behind them, similar to the one she'd seen earlier. Frank noticed it too, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Don't look back. They've been following since we left the house. Jessica's heart raced. Are they going to hurt us? Not in broad daylight, but they want to know where we're going, who we're meeting. Frank's voice was calm, but his eyes constantly checked the rearview mirror. When we reach the main road, I'm going to accelerate. Hold on. The truck lurched forward as Frank hit the gas, the sudden acceleration pressing Jessica back against her seat. The SUV sped up too, closing the distance between them. Frank made a sharp right onto the highway, tires squealing. What followed was a tense cat-and-mouse game through the rural roads of Oklahoma. Frank drove with the skill of someone who'd done this before, taking unexpected turns, doubling back, using the terrain to his advantage. The SUV stayed with them, driven by someone equally skilled. Just as Jessica thought they'd never shake their pursuer, Frank swerved suddenly into a gas station with security cameras prominently displayed. The SUV hesitated, then drove past, unwilling to be caught on camera. But not before Jessica caught a glimpse of the logo on its door. Southwest Resource Extraction. Frank used his phone to snap a picture of the license plate as it passed. That'll give us something to work with. His calm demeanor never wavered, but Jessica could see the tension in his shoulders. You okay? She nodded, though her hands were shaking. She'd expected paperwork and lawyers when she inherited the farm, not car chases and buried gold. What have I gotten Emma into? They took a different route to the diner, watching carefully to ensure they weren't followed again. Frank used the drive to explain what he knew about Southwest. They're not just a mining company. They've got politicians in their pocket, judges on their payroll. They find land with resources, buy it cheap before anyone knows what's there, then make millions. And they don't like competition. The diner was nearly empty when they arrived. Michael Eagle was easy to spot. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that held decades of patience. He stood when they approached, nodding to Jessica. "You look like her, your grandmother." Same eyes. They sat in a corner booth as far from other patrons as possible. Michael ordered coffee. Jessica ordered water, her throat too tight for anything else. Frank introduced himself, explaining his connection to the property. "My father told me everything before he died," Michael began. "About the night your grandfather tried to take more uranium. About the fight. About how your grandmother could have blamed him, could have claimed self-defense, but instead chose to share the burden of that secret." "Was it self-defense?" Jessica asked. Michael's eyes were steady. "Does it matter now? Two men fought over rocks in the ground and one died. My father spent the rest of his life regretting it just as your grandmother did." He pulled out a folder thick with documents. "These are the original land records, the real ones. The proof of the murders, the theft, everything my family has gathered over the decades. We have enough now to make a legal claim to finally get justice for what was taken." "Then why haven't you?" Frank asked. Michael smiled sadly. "Because your grandmother wouldn't let us. She said the land needed a guardian, someone to make sure the uranium stayed buried. She was afraid if we brought attention to it, others would come. Mining companies, government agencies, treasure hunters. The sacred ground would be destroyed." "But she's gone now," Jessica said. "Yes, and the choice is yours. You own the land legally. You can mine it, sell it, or—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Or you can help us return it to its rightful owners." "My people wouldn't mine it. We protect it as your grandmother did." Jessica felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "What would happen if I gave the land back?" Michael leaned forward. "We would file the claim present in the evidence. It would make news. The Osage murders are well documented now, but this would be new proof, a new chapter. There would be investigations, probably lawsuits. The uranium deposit would be sealed, protected as a memorial site. And I would walk away with nothing," Jessica finished. "You have the box of gold. That's not nothing." But as Michael spoke, his expression changed, his eyes focusing on something over Jessica's shoulder. Frank turned to look, his body tensing. A man in a dark suit had entered the diner and was speaking to the waitress, who pointed in their direction. "We need to go. Now." Frank's voice was urgent. Michael gathered his documents quickly, shoving them back into the folder. They slipped out the back door just as the man started toward their table. Frank led them to his truck parked behind the building. "That was Chambers' right-hand man," he explained as they pulled away. "Victor Chambers is the CEO of Southwest. If he's sending people after us in person, they're getting desperate." Michael directed them to a quiet spot by a lake where they could continue their conversation without being overheard. The documents he'd brought were comprehensive. Land deeds showing how the property had been transferred from Osage ownership through a series of fraudulent transactions, culminating in Jessica's grandfather purchasing it from a bank in 1958. But more disturbing were the connections Michael had uncovered. Victor Chambers isn't just any CEO. His grandfather was William Chambers, one of the architects of the Osage murders. His family built their fortune on stolen land and murdered Osage people. And now he wants to complete what his grandfather started: extract every resource, desecrate what's left of our sacred sites, and bury the evidence once and for all. Jessica stared at the old photographs, the faces of Osage families who had been murdered for their mineral rights. Something cold settled in her stomach as she made connections she'd never seen before. The land's bloody history wasn't just abstract, it was personal. Her own grandfather, maybe even her great-grandfather, had been part of this story. Frank examined the geological surveys included in Michael's documents, his expression growing more serious as he studied them. "This isn't just any uranium deposit. Based on these readings, we could be looking at one of the richest concentrations in North America. The value today would be—" He made some calculations on his phone. "Maybe $500 million. The number hung in the air between them. $500 million buried beneath a worthless-looking farm in Oklahoma. Enough money to change countless lives, or to corrupt them beyond recognition." As they drove back to pick up Emma, Jessica noticed Frank checking beneath the truck at every stop. After the third time she asked what he was doing, looking for trackers, he found one attached to the undercarriage, a small black device that he crushed beneath his boot. "They know we met with Michael. They'll be watching the farm even more closely now." Jessica thought of Emma waiting at Frank's house, innocent and unaware of the danger swirling around them. What if they try to use her to get to me? Frank's expression hardened. That's why I called in some friends, Army Rangers retired like me. They're already at my place keeping an eye on things. No one's getting near your little girl. When they arrived at Frank's ranch, Jessica was surprised to see three weathered-looking men sitting on the porch, casual in their postures, but alert in their eyes. Emma was inside with Frank's wife Martha, baking cookies as if nothing in the world was wrong. The sight brought tears to Jessica's eyes. Her daughter briefly living the normal childhood Jessica had always wanted for her. On the drive back to the farm with Emma safely between them in the truck and two of Frank's friends following in another vehicle, Jessica spotted a security company car parked on the road near their property. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Frank muttered. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jessica sat on the porch with Frank watching his friends patrol the perimeter of the property. The stars were brilliant out here, away from city lights. The land stretched out in all directions, holding its secrets close. Jessica could feel them beneath her feet. Not just the uranium, but the bones, the stories, the weight of choices made and unmade. Frank handed her a cup of coffee, black and strong. We've got a decision to make. His voice was gentle but firm. Southwest isn't going to give up. They've been after this land for years, and now they know we know what's under it. They'll use legal means first. Pressure, threats, maybe bribes. When that doesn't work, they'll try other methods. Jessica stared into her coffee, seeing Emma's future swirling in its depths. The gold alone could give them a fresh start. A nice house in a good school district, maybe even college savings. But the uranium deposit was a different matter. Even if she wanted to sell the land, knowing its history, could she live with herself? The security cameras Frank had hastily installed around the property suddenly activated, their feed showing on his tablet. A figure was moving through the darkness toward the chicken coop, flashlight beam bobbing. One of Frank's friends intercepted the intruder, the confrontation silent but tense on the night vision feed. Jessica watched as the trespasser was escorted off the property, memorizing his face. Young, professional-looking, carrying what appeared to be sampling equipment. Not the usual corporate thug. They're getting soil samples, Frank confirmed, studying the footage, trying to map the deposit without access to the land itself. The next morning, a gleaming black Cadillac pulled into the driveway, dust billowing behind it. Victor Chambers himself had arrived, a man in his 50s with the confident bearing of someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no. Jessica watched from the window as he approached the house, manila envelope in hand, two security guards flanking him. Frank met him on the porch, shotgun visible but not threatening. Jessica joined them, telling Emma to stay inside. Ms. Morgan. Chambers' smile was practiced, revealing expensive dental work. I understand you've recently inherited this property. I'd like to make you an offer. $2 million. The figure hung in the air like a baited hook. For this worthless dirt, Jessica said, unable to keep the sarcasm from her voice. Chambers' smile didn't waver. Let's not play games, Ms. Morgan. We both know what's under this land. The only question is whether you want to profit from it legally or whether you want to make things difficult. The threat was thinly veiled. Jessica glanced at Frank, whose expression remained impassive, and then back at Chambers. I know about your grandfather, she said quietly, and the Osage murders, and I know about my own family's role in all of it. Something flickered behind Chambers' eyes. Surprise quickly masked. Ancient history. His tone dismissed a century of suffering in two words. This is business, Ms. Morgan. Pure and simple. You're sitting on a fortune, but you can't access it without permits. Equipment, expertise. All things my company can provide. Or you can take my very generous offer and walk away wealthy. Jessica thought about the gold hidden in the house, about Michael Eagle's documents, about her grandmother standing guard for 40 years. I need time to think. Chambers handed her his card. 24 hours. Then the offer drops to $1 million. His smile turned cold. And Ms. Morgan, accidents happen out here in the country. All the time. No witnesses, no help for miles. Something to consider. As the Cadillac disappeared down the driveway, Frank spat in the dust, threatening a woman and child. His grandfather would be proud. Jessica went inside to check on Emma, finding her at the kitchen table with a drawing pad. The child looked up, eyes wide with concern beyond her years. Is that man trying to take our house? Jessica sat beside her daughter, wondering how much an 8-year-old could understand about greed, history, and justice. Not just the house, sweetie. What's under it, too? Remember the shiny metal you found? Emma nodded, her small face serious. Frank said it was dangerous. That's why we had to wash my hands. It is dangerous. Jessica chose her words carefully. But it's also valuable. And a long time ago, it belonged to different people who had this land before us. Then something bad happened, and they lost their land. Like when Dad took our savings, Emma's innocent comparison made Jessica's heart ache. The child had understood more than Jessica realized. Kind of like that, yes. And now we have to decide, do we keep something that maybe doesn't belong to us, or do we help make it right? Emma considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. Does making it right mean we have to leave? Jessica hadn't thought that far ahead, but the question cut to the heart of the matter. Maybe. But we'd be doing the right thing. Emma was quiet for a long moment, drawing circles on her pad. Great-grandma stayed here to protect the land, right? Even though the treasure made her sad, Jessica nodded, wondering at her daughter's perception. That's right. Then we shouldn't keep the treasure. Emma's voice was firm with the clear moral certainty that only children possess. It made Great-grandma sad. We don't want to be sad like her. Out of the mouths of babes, Jessica thought, tears stinging her eyes. The simplicity of Emma's logic cut through the complications of history, law, and finance. Her daughter had seen what Jessica had been struggling to articulate, that some treasures came at too high a price. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner, Emma complained of a headache. Jessica noticed her daughter seemed unusually pale, with dark circles under her eyes. By bedtime, Emma was vomiting, her small body racked with chills. When Jessica found a nosebleed that wouldn't stop, panic set in. Frank drove them to the hospital, breaking every speed limit. His face was grim as he explained what he feared. Radiation sickness from handling the uranium ore. Emma had only touched it briefly, but children were especially vulnerable. In the emergency room, Jessica paced while doctors examined her daughter. Frank made calls, pulling strings to get a specialist in radiation exposure on the phone. Hours passed in a blur of medical terms and tests. Finally, a doctor approached with cautious relief on his face. It's mild radiation exposure. She'll be fine, but we want to keep her overnight for observation. The doctor's expression turned stern. You need to tell us exactly what she was exposed to and where. Frank handled the explanations, his former government credentials smoothing the process. He didn't mention the deposit, only the sample Emma had found. The hospital staff seemed satisfied, but Jessica couldn't shake the image of her daughter's pale face against the hospital sheets, IVs in her small arms. While Emma slept sedated and monitored, Jessica stepped into the hallway to call Michael Eagle. Her decision was made. The land would go back to the Osage, whatever the personal cost. She couldn't risk Emma's safety for money, no matter how much. But when she returned to Emma's room, Frank was staring at his phone, his expression grim. The security feed from the farm showed multiple vehicles approaching, Southwest Resource trucks with what looked like drilling equipment. They're going to try to extract samples directly. Frank's voice was tight with anger. They know we're here, that the property is unguarded. What about your friends? Jessica asked. Frank shook his head. They're good men, but they're outnumbered. He made another call, voice low and urgent. More backup was coming, he explained, but it would take time. They needed to stall Southwest until the authorities could be involved. Jessica looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully now, color returning to her cheeks. She thought of her grandmother standing guard for 40 years over lands soaked in blood and secrets. She thought of Michael Eagle waiting 40 years for justice that seemed perpetually out of reach. She thought of Chambers so confident in his power to take what he wanted without consequences. Something hardened inside her, a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. This ends tonight. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Call Michael, tell him to bring those documents, and call every news outlet in Oklahoma. It's time everyone knew the truth about this land. The hospital corridor felt like a tunnel stretching endlessly as Jessica made her way back to Emma's room. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly green glow, making even the healthy look ill. She pulled her phone from her pocket, checked the security feed Frank had linked to her device. The men at her farm were methodical, professional, not the usual roughnecks, but specialists in protective gear. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Michael Eagle answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. It took only moments for sleep to clear from his voice as Jessica explained the situation. I'll bring everything, he assured her. And Jessica, you're doing the right thing. Your grandmother would be proud. Would she? Jessica wasn't so sure. Eleanor had chosen 40 years of solitude to guard those secrets. Was Jessica betraying that sacrifice by bringing everything into the light? Or was she finally fulfilling the purpose of that lonely vigil? Frank's expression was grim when she returned to Emma's room. They've started drilling small test bores around the chicken coop. His voice held carefully controlled anger. But I've got friends on their way. Former rangers don't take kindly to corporations threatening women and children. Jessica watched her daughter's chest rise and fall in drug-induced sleep. Emma looked impossibly small beneath the hospital blanket, her skin still too pale. The uranium sample she'd handled was just a fragment, a tiny piece of what lay beneath their land. What if she'd been exposed to more? What if Jessica had never noticed? Some treasures aren't worth the price. The thought came unbidden, crystal clear in its simplicity. By morning, Emma was awake and visibly improved. The doctors were optimistic, but insisted on another day of observation. Jessica stayed by her bedside while Frank coordinated with his friends by phone. The situation at the farm had escalated overnight. Southwest's team had brought in heavier equipment, and local sheriff's deputies had arrived ostensibly to investigate trespassing, but seemingly in no hurry to stop the drilling. Michael arrived at the hospital just after noon, manila envelope tucked under his arm. The documents inside represented decades of patient work. Land deeds tracing ownership back to the Osage Nation photographs of murder victims, from the 1920s testimony from survivors, geological surveys, and, most damning of all, letters between William Chambers and Jessica's great-grandfather discussing how to acquire certain properties with mineral potential through methods that would not bear close scrutiny. These aren't just historical curiosities. Michael spread the papers across Emma's hospital tray while she slept. They're evidence of crimes that were never prosecuted, injustices that were never acknowledged. My people have been fighting for recognition for Achitri. This could change everything. Jessica examined a black and white photograph of an Osage family taken around 1920. They stood proudly in front of a handsome house, evidence of the wealth that had briefly come to the tribe through their mineral rights before the murders began. She turned the photo over. On the back was written Thomas Eagle's grandparents, 1919, murdered 1921. This is personal for you too. Jessica looked up at Michael, understanding deepening. Thomas Eagle was my grandfather. The man who caught your grandfather that night was my father. The connection between their families stretched back nearly a century, bound by blood and secrets, and the riches beneath the earth. Frank entered the room, phone in hand. His expression told Jessica everything before he spoke. Southwest brought in the heavy equipment. They're doing core samples now, right near the chicken coop. The land's guardians were gone, first Eleanor, now Jessica, and the vultures had descended. Jessica felt something shift inside her, a steely resolve replacing uncertainty. Her voice was steady when she spoke. Then it's time the whole world knows what's under that dirt. Not just the uranium, but the bodies and the lies. Michael nodded, pulling out his phone. I'll call my tribal council. We need to make a formal claim, get injunctions filed immediately. Frank had his own contacts. A journalist at the Oklahoma City paper who'd been investigating Southwest for years, a state representative who owed him a favor, federal contacts from his days with the Department of Interior. Within an hour, the wheels were in motion. Jessica authorized Michael to speak for her in dealing with tribal authorities. She signed affidavits about what she'd found and the threats Chambers had made. And then in the quiet of Emma's hospital room while her daughter slept, she made a video statement. Looking directly into Frank's phone camera, Jessica told the story. All of it. The inheritance, the discovery, her grandmother's letter, the Osage connection, the threats, Emma's radiation exposure. Her voice never wavered, even when describing her own family's complicity in the historical theft. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but acknowledging them is where justice begins. My grandmother stood guard over this secret for 40 years. I'm choosing to bring it into the light. By evening, the video had been sent to every news outlet in Oklahoma. Michael's tribal council had filed emergency injunctions against Southwest. Frank's journalist contact was preparing a front-page expose. And most importantly, Emma was recovering the color returning to her cheeks as she sat up in bed eating hospital pudding, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Outside Emma's hospital room, Jessica checked the security feed again. The drilling had stopped. Southwest vehicles were leaving, followed by sheriff's cruisers. Something had changed, though Jessica couldn't be sure what. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. "I underestimated you, Ms. Morgan." Victor Chambers' voice was silk over steel. "I thought you were just another desperate single mother who'd take the money and run." "My mistake." Jessica felt a chill despite the hospital's warmth. "What do you want a meeting?" "Just you and me. No lawyers, no tribal representatives, no retired rangers playing bodyguard. I think we can find a compromise that benefits everyone." Every instinct told Jessica to refuse to hang up to let the legal process unfold. But Chambers was powerful, connected. He could drag things out for years, drain resources Jessica didn't have, make life hell for her and Emma, while the courts deliberated. What kind of compromise? $10 million. Chambers named the figure casually as if discussing the weather. "For the land, the mineral rights, and your silence about certain historical matters that are better left in the past." 10 million, Ms. Morgan. Think what that would mean for your daughter. The number was staggering. More money than Jessica had ever imagined possessing. It would mean security opportunity, freedom from financial worry forever. All she had to do was walk away from Michael Eagle, from the Osage's century-long quest for justice, from her grandmother's 40-year vigil. "I'll think about it." Jessica kept her voice neutral. "Don't think too long." Chambers' tone hardened. "My offer expires at midnight. And Ms. Morgan, if you're recording this conversation, don't bother. My attorneys would ensure it never sees the light of day." The line went dead. Jessica stood in the sterile hospital corridor, phone clutched in her hand, the weight of decision pressing down on her. $10 million. A fortune that could transform Emma's life, ensure she never knew the grinding poverty Jessica had endured, all for the low, low price of her soul. When she returned to Emma's room, Frank took one look at her face and knew. "Chambers called you." Jessica nodded, sinking into the chair beside Emma's bed. The child was asleep again, peaceful and innocent. 10 million, for the land and our silence. Frank's weathered face showed no surprise. That's how they operate. Buy what they can't steal, silence what they can't deny. His eyes held a question he was too respectful to ask directly. "I told him I'd think about it." Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "And will you?" Frank's tone held no judgment, only curiosity. Jessica looked at her sleeping daughter, thinking of all $10 million could provide. The best schools, college travel opportunities Jessica had never dreamed of for herself. Then she thought of Eleanor Morgan living alone in a decaying farmhouse, standing guard over buried secrets and stolen land for 40 years. She thought of the Osage families in the photographs, their lives and mineral rights stolen through murder and fraud. My grandmother chose 40 years of loneliness to protect that land. Jessica's voice grew stronger with each word. She could have taken the gold and vanished, but she stayed. She kept watch. She made sure no one else would suffer or die for what's buried there. "I won't betray that in a single night for any amount of money." Frank nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Then we'd better prepare for Chambers' next move. He won't take rejection, well." As if summoned by Frank's words, Jessica's phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. The cameras showed new vehicles arriving at the farm, not Southwest's drilling rigs this time, but unmarked SUVs. Men in dark clothing moved with military precision, carrying what looked like professional equipment. They're not just after samples anymore. Frank studied the footage, his expression hardening. They're going for extraction, portable equipment, minimal footprint. They'll take what they can and be gone before any injunction can be enforced. Jessica felt panic rising. Can they do that? Just steal it? Frank's laugh held no humor. They've been stealing from this land for 100 years. Why stop now? The next hours passed in a blur of phone calls and urgent consultations. Michael rallied tribal members to the farm as legal witnesses. Frank's former ranger friends formed a protective perimeter, not confronting Southwest's team, but documenting every move with cameras and recording equipment. News vans began to arrive, drawn by the emergency injunction filing and rumors of a standoff between Native Americans and a powerful energy company. Jessica longed to be there to stand on her grandmother's porch and face down the thieves herself. But Emma needed her more, still weak from the radiation exposure, confused by all the commotion. So Jessica stayed watching events unfold through security feeds and news reports, her stomach nodding with each new development. Just after 7 p.m., a breaking news alert flashed across the hospital room's television. Southwest Resource Extraction CEO Victor Chambers had called an emergency press conference. Jessica turned up the volume as Chambers appeared on screen, immaculately dressed, expression grave. Recent accusations regarding our exploration activities in Osage County are not only false, but defamatory. Chambers spoke with practiced sincerity. Southwest has all necessary permits for mineral testing on land we have optioned for purchase. Claims of trespassing, intimidation, or historical wrongdoing are categorically denied. We are a responsible corporate citizen with deep roots in Oklahoma's energy economy. Jessica watched in disbelief as Chambers continued painting Southwest as the victim of anti-energy activists and tribal overreach. He never mentioned her or the farm specifically, but the implication was clear. Anyone opposing Southwest was opposing progress jobs, energy independence. The most outrageous claims involve historical events from the 1920s, matters long settled by the courts of that era. Chambers' expression conveyed wounded dignity. To drag my family's name through the mud based on century-old grievances serves no one. Southwest is focused on the future, not the distant past. The press conference concluded with the Chambers announcing Southwest had voluntarily suspended operations at the site in question, pending resolution of these baseless claims. The real message was between the lines, Southwest was retreating, but only temporarily, and they controlled the public narrative. Frank muted the television, disgust plain on his face. Lies wrapped in half-truths. The courts didn't settle the Osage murders. They buried them. Most of the killers were never prosecuted. The victims never got justice, just quiet payments to make the scandal disappear. Michael arrived at the hospital shortly after bringing news from the farm. Southwest's team had withdrawn before tribal members arrived, taking their samples with them. The sheriff had refused to treat it as a criminal trespass, citing disputed property rights and pending legal action. The chicken coop was damaged, the loose floorboard torn away, the hiding place beneath empty, except for scattered dirt. They got what they came for. Michael's voice was heavy with frustration. Core samples enough to verify the uranium deposit's location and quality. They'll use that to bolster their claim, argue the public interest in extraction outweighs historical concerns. Jessica felt a strange calm settling over her, clarity emerging from chaos. Then we use their own game against them. Her voice was steady, determined. They want to make this about the present, not the past. Fine. Let's talk about a corporate CEO threatening a single mother. Let's talk about radiation exposure to an 8-year-old child. Let's talk about armed men trespassing on private property to drill unauthorized holes. Frank and Michael exchanged glances, something like hope kindling in their eyes. Jessica continued, her mind racing ahead. Chambers thinks he can outspend us in court, outlast us in the press. But he's forgetting something. This isn't just about money or minerals. This is about justice. For the Osage people, for my grandmother, for every person who's had something stolen by men who thought their wealth made them untouchable. The doctor discharged Emma the next morning with a clean bill of health and instructions to follow up with a specialist. Jessica brought her daughter back to Frank's ranch rather than the farm, accepting his wife Martha's offer to let them stay until things settled. The farm wasn't safe, not with Southwest agents potentially still watching, not with the chicken coop torn apart, and Emma's radiation exposure still fresh in Jessica's mind. The story broke across Oklahoma media that day. Disputed land claim reveals century-old murder conspiracy. Jessica's video statement played on local news intercut with historical footage of the Osage oil fields and photographs of murder victims from the 1920s. Michael provided context in interviews explaining how the land had been stolen through violence and fraud, how his grandfather had confronted Jessica's over the uranium deposit, how Jessica's grandmother had chosen to protect the land rather than profit from it. Southwest attempted damage control, issuing statements about their commitment to working with tribal authorities, their respect for historical preservation, their willingness to find an equitable solution that acknowledged all stakeholders. But the narrative was slipping from their control. State legislators called for investigations. Environmental groups raised concerns about uranium extraction near water sources. Historians and academics validated the Osage Nation's claims about the Reign of Terror and its connection to mineral theft. Jessica watched it unfold from the safety of Frank's ranch, alternating between hope and fear. Emma seemed to bounce back quickly, as children often do, fascinated by the horses in Frank's small stable and thrilled to help Martha bake cookies in a kitchen that didn't sag or leak. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that Chambers wouldn't surrender easily, that the worst was yet to come. Her intuition proved correct when Michael called with troubling news. Southwest had filed a countersuit claiming Jessica had no legal right to the mineral deposits on the property. According to their filing, a 1958 deed transfer had explicitly separated surface rights from mineral rights, with the latter remaining with the previous owner, a holding company that Southwest had conveniently acquired years ago. They were asking the court for immediate access to prevent irreparable economic harm through delay. Can they do that? Jessica's voice betrayed her anxiety. Just claim they already own what's under my land. It's a common tactic in energy disputes. Michael's tone was grim. Split estate laws are complicated. They're hoping to muddy the waters, drag things out until you give up. But there's more. They're also suing you personally for defamation. $10 million in damages. The figure couldn't be coincidence. Exactly what Chambers had offered her, now weaponized as a threat. The message was clear: take our money willingly, or we'll take it through the courts. Jessica felt her resolve waver for the first time. She had no resources to fight a protracted legal battle against a corporation with seemingly limitless funds and political connections. Michael sensed her uncertainty. We're not alone in this fight. The tribal council has authorized our legal team to represent you. Environmental groups are filing amicus briefs. Historical preservation societies are getting involved. Even some state officials are quietly supporting us. They don't like outside corporations pushing Oklahoma landowners around. Jessica appreciated the encouragement, but reality still loomed large. How long will all this take? Months, years, probably years. Michael didn't sugarcoat it. These cases are marathons, not sprints. Southwest is counting on us running out of energy or money before they do. Years of legal battles, years of uncertainty, years of looking over her shoulder, wondering if Chambers would resort to more direct methods of persuasion. Years of trying to build a stable life for Emma while carrying the weight of this dispute. The prospect was exhausting. What if we could find definitive proof of their connection to the original land theft? Jessica's mind returned to her grandmother's letter, the documents Michael had gathered. Would that change anything legally? Michael was quiet for a moment. It would certainly affect public opinion, and it might create pressure for a settlement. But we'd need something ironclad. Documentation linking William Chambers directly to the murders and land theft, preferably in his own words. Such evidence seemed unlikely after a century. Most of the conspirators had taken their secrets to the grave, careful never to create paper trails connecting them to murders. Yet Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that her grandmother had known more than she'd revealed in her letter. Eleanor had guarded the land for 40 years, had chosen poverty and isolation rather than profit from its bloody history. Had she been protecting more than just the uranium deposit? The answer came from an unexpected source. Emma, playing in the spare bedroom at Frank's ranch, called out excitedly, "Mom, I found another doll." Just like the other one, Jessica found her daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor, a porcelain doll identical to the one from the farmhouse in her hands. How did this get here? Jessica's confusion was evident. Martha found it in our stuff when she was making up the beds. Emma's explanation was matter-of-fact. She said it must have gotten mixed in when we packed. Jessica examined the doll carefully. It was indeed identical to the one Emma had found at the farm. Same porcelain face, same faded red velvet dress. But something felt wrong about the weight, the balance. She turned it over in her hands, finding a small seam in the fabric at the back of the doll's dress that didn't match the construction. Acting on instinct, Jessica pulled at the stitching. The thread gave way easily, revealing a hidden compartment within the doll's body. Inside was a small key and a folded piece of paper with a single word written in her grandmother's handwriting: oak. The old oak tree where David Morgan was buried. Jessica's mind raced. Her grandmother had hidden something there, something that required a key, something she'd made sure Jessica would find if she looked carefully enough. And she'd created a backup, a second doll with the same clue in case the first was lost or discovered. Jessica called Frank immediately, explaining her discovery. "Can we get to the farm without being seen? I need to check something at the old oak tree." Frank was cautious but intrigued. Southwest people are still watching the property, but they're focused on the house in the chicken coop. We could approach from the back acreage through the woods. His tactical mind was already plotting routes and contingencies. That night, under cover of darkness, Frank drove Jessica to the far edge of her property, approaching through a neighbor's land with permission from an old friend of his. They moved silently through the woods, Frank leading with the confidence of someone who'd navigated hostile territory before. The old oak tree stood silhouetted against the starry sky, ancient and imposing, its trunk marked with the Osage symbols Frank had pointed out before. Jessica approached reverently, aware she might be standing on her grandfather's unmarked grave. The key from the doll was small, likely for a padlock or a box rather than a door. But what would her grandmother have hidden here, exposed to the elements for decades? Frank examined the tree trunk, carefully running his hands over the rough bark, tapping occasionally to test for hollow spaces. Near the base where root met trunk, his fingers found an anomaly, a small metal panel cunningly disguised with paint and texture to match the tree's bark. The tiny keyhole was almost invisible until you knew exactly where to look. The key fit perfectly. The panel swung open to reveal a waterproof metal container embedded within the tree trunk itself. Inside was another box, this one wrapped in oilskin and sealed with wax. Frank helped Jessica extract it carefully, both of them acutely aware of time passing, of the possibility of discovery. They didn't open the box until they were safely back at Frank's ranch, seated at his kitchen table with Emma asleep in the next room. Jessica broke the wax seal with trembling hands and unwrapped the oilskin. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age but perfectly preserved, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, Evidence. The journal was David Morgan's. Unlike Eleanor's letter, which had been written decades after the events, this was a contemporary account, a geologist's field notes combined with personal observations. David had recorded everything: his assignment to survey the land for Midwest Energy, his discovery of uranium, deposits, the company's excitement over the find. But more importantly, he documented the visit from Thomas Eagle, the evidence of land theft, and the moral crisis that followed. May 15, 1959. Eagle brought documents today that change everything. Land deeds showing fraudulent transfers from Osage headright owners to white guardians, then to banks, then to developers. Photographs of Osage families who died mysteriously after oil was discovered on their land. And most damning, letters between William Chambers and John Harper, discussing how to acquire certain properties with troublesome owners. Eleanor is devastated. Her father was Harper's business partner. Our home, our future is built on stolen land and possibly murder. May 17, 1959. Meeting with W. Chambers Jr. today. He says his father's alleged involvement in the Osage matters is ancient history and best left buried. Offered to buy our silence, $50,000 and guaranteed employment with Midwest if we proceed with the uranium claims without mentioning the Osage connection. When I asked about returning the land to its rightful owners, he laughed. Said dead Indians don't file lawsuits. The journal continued documenting David's growing moral conflict. Eleanor's insistence that they couldn't profit from stolen land, and ultimately the compromise with Thomas Eagle, they would extract just enough gold and uranium to start over elsewhere, then help Eagle document the theft for future legal action. But the final entries revealed what had truly happened on the night David died. June 10, 1959. Cannot sleep. Cannot live with this compromise. The deposit is worth millions, perhaps tens of millions. To walk away with a few thousand in gold seems madness. Eleanor doesn't understand. This is our one chance at real wealth, real security. She speaks of blood money, of curses of debts that can't be repaid. But what do we owe people long dead? What do we owe their descendants who never worked this land as we have tomorrow night while Eleanor sleeps? I will return to the main deposit and take more, just enough to ensure our future. What she doesn't know won't hurt her. June 11, 1959. Last entry. Taking mining equipment to the North Field tonight. E thinks I'm in town buying supplies for our departure. T. Eagle suspects nothing. By morning, I'll have extracted enough ore to sell privately. Buyer in Kansas City already arranged through W. Chambers Jr. He doesn't care where it came from, only that it's high grade. This land has one last gift to give me, whether it wants to or not. The journal ended there on the night David Morgan died. But the envelope contained something even more valuable. Photographs and a microcassette tape. The photographs showed William Chambers Sr. with Jessica's great-grandfather and other men standing over what appeared to be a freshly dug grave. The tape, according to the label in Eleanor's handwriting, contained a conversation between David Morgan and William Chambers Jr. from May 1959, discussing both the uranium deposit and handling the Osage problem, as their fathers had. Jessica stared at the evidence, understanding dawning. Her grandmother hadn't just been protecting the uranium deposit. She'd been protecting this. Proof that could destroy the Chambers family, expose a century of theft and murder, and perhaps finally bring justice for the Osage victims. Eleanor hadn't used it, possibly out of fear, possibly out of lingering loyalty to her husband's memory. Instead, she'd preserved it, hidden it where only her granddaughter might find it if the need arose. This changes everything. Frank's voice was quiet but intense. This isn't just historical evidence. That tape could be proof of conspiracy accessory to murder. There's no statute of limitations on homicide. Michael arrived early the next morning, summoned by Jessica's urgent call. His hands shook slightly as he examined the journal and photographs. My grandfather told my father that David Morgan had evidence, but they never found it after his death. They assumed it was destroyed or hidden with the body. The three of them gathered around Frank's kitchen table, planning their next move. The evidence needed proper legal handling to be admissible in court. Chain of custody would be crucial. They would need expert authentication of the journal and photographs, technical help to preserve and transcribe the aging microcassette. But most importantly, they needed to move quickly before Chambers could learn of their discovery and take steps to neutralize it. Frank made calls to trusted former colleagues. Michael contacted the tribal legal team. Jessica reached out to the journalist who'd broken the initial story, arranging a meeting with strict confidentiality protocols. Their careful planning was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines gravel crunching under heavy tires. Frank moved to the window, his expression shifting from caution to alarm. Southwest security vehicles, 4 of them, and Sheriff's Department cruisers. A moment later, someone pounded on the front door. Sheriff's Department, we have a warrant. Frank moved with surprising speed for his age, gathering the journal photographs and tape. This goes out the back right now. His voice was a harsh whisper as he handed the evidence to Michael. Get it to the tribal council, into the official record. We'll stall them here. Michael slipped out the rear door as Frank went to answer the front, his manner transforming from tense to casually annoyed. Jessica quickly woke Emma, keeping her voice calm despite the hammering pulse in her throat. We need to be very quiet, sweetie. It's like a game of hide and seek. Sheriff Delaney stood on the porch, flanked by deputies and men in Southwest security uniforms. Behind them, Victor Chambers himself waited beside a black Escalade, watching the proceedings with cool detachment. The sheriff held out a document. Search warrant for the Morgan property in connection with allegations of trespassing and property damage. We have reason to believe stolen items from that property are located here. Frank examined the warrant with exaggerated care, finding the expected flaws. This is my property, Sheriff, not Ms. Morgan's. Your warrant doesn't cover my home. The sheriff's expression darkened. We have witness statements placing Ms. Morgan here, along with items removed from the property under dispute. That gives us probable cause. Legal theatrics followed. Frank questioning the warrant's scope, the sheriff insisting on immediate compliance, Chambers watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. Jessica held Emma close, the child sensing the tension but remaining bravely silent. Every minute of delay was another minute for Michael to get farther away with the evidence. When they could stall no longer, Frank stepped aside, allowing the search to proceed. The officers were thorough but not destructive, clearly looking for specific items. Jessica watched them move from room to room, grateful that Michael had taken everything of importance, worried nonetheless about what they might find. The sheriff himself discovered the porcelain doll in Emma's temporary bedroom, holding it up with grim satisfaction. This matches the description of an antique doll reported missing from the Morgan property. Jessica felt a chill. Someone had been watching them closely enough to know about the doll, and Emma had found closely enough to use it as a pretext for the search. She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. That doll belongs to my daughter. It's been in our family for generations. The sheriff seemed unimpressed by her claim. We'll let the court sort that out, ma'am. In the meantime, this and any other items removed from the property in dispute will be confiscated as evidence. The search continued for nearly an hour, yielding nothing more significant than the doll. The frustration on the officers' faces was evident as they began to withdraw. But as they reached the door, Chambers himself approached, speaking directly to Jessica for the first time. "I tried to be reasonable, Ms. Morgan. I offered you a fair price, a new start. Instead, you chose to drag my family's name through the mud to resurrect ancient grievances for your own profit." Jessica met his gaze without flinching. "Is that what you tell yourself, that your family's crimes are ancient grievances? That stealing land and minerals through murder is something people should just get over?" Chambers' smile never reached his eyes. "Be careful with accusations, Ms. Morgan. Defamation can be very expensive, and so can raising a child with no income, no home, and mounting legal bills." His gaze shifted to Emma, the threat unmistakable, though never explicitly stated. Smart mothers know when to cut their losses. Something snapped inside Jessica, not toward fear, but toward a cold, clear fury. She stepped closer to Chambers, her voice low but perfectly audible to everyone on the porch. "The difference between you and me, Mr. Chambers, is that I have to look my daughter in the eye every day and show her what integrity means. What would your grandfather think if he could see you now, still trying to steal what isn't yours, still threatening those who stand in your way, but without even the courage to do your own dirty work?" Chambers' facade cracked just for an instant, a flash of genuine anger before the corporate mask slipped back into place. "Your grandmother was stubborn too. It didn't end well for her." The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Had Eleanor Morgan's isolation been entirely self-imposed? Or had there been pressure threats, perhaps even direct action to ensure her silence? Before Jessica could respond, Frank stepped forward, his presence suddenly commanding despite his age. "Time for you folks to leave. The warrant's been executed. You're now trespassing on my property." Sheriff Delaney hesitated, caught between Chambers' obvious influence and the impropriety of remaining without cause. After an uncomfortable moment, he nodded to his deputies. "Let's go. We've got what we came for." As the vehicles pulled away, Jessica felt her knees weaken, the adrenaline that had kept her upright now ebbing away. Frank steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good. Kept them busy, kept them focused on the wrong things, but they took the doll." Jessica's voice shook slightly. "If they find the hidden compartment, they'll know there was a key. They'll know something's hidden at the oak tree." Frank's smile was grim but satisfied. "The key you found was a spare. Your grandmother wasn't one to leave things to chance. The real key's been in plain sight all along." Confusion furrowed Jessica's brow until Frank reached into his pocket, pulling out a small worn key attached to an ordinary keyring. "Eleanor gave me this years ago. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you got it. I've carried it every day since she died, waiting for you to show up." Jessica stared at the key, understanding blooming. Her grandmother had anticipated everything. Southwest's interest, possible threats, the need for backup plans and trusted allies. Eleanor had known Frank was watching over her, had chosen him as a second guardian for her secrets. All those years of isolation hadn't been pure stubbornness. Eleanor had been playing a long game, preserving evidence, waiting for the right moment, the right person to bring everything to light. Michael returned that evening with news both good and bad. The evidence was safe now in the hands of both tribal attorneys and state prosecutors. The journal and photographs had been digitally scanned and authenticated by preliminary examination. The microcassette had been professionally transferred to digital format, preserving the aging audio. But Southwest was escalating their legal offensive. They'd filed for an emergency injunction to halt all unauthorized disclosures of proprietary information related to the property, essentially a gag order to prevent Jessica, Michael, or the tribal council from discussing the case publicly. They'd also expanded their defamation suit to include Frank, Michael, and the tribal council itself, with damages now totaling $50 million. "They're scared." Frank's assessment was blunt. "They know what we found and they're trying to bury it under legal paper before it goes public." Michael nodded in agreement. "Our legal team is fighting the injunction. First Amendment issues public interest exceptions, but Chambers has judges in his pocket. It could go either way." Jessica listened to their tactical discussion, her mind drifting to more personal concerns. Emma sat in the next room drawing pictures with Martha, seemingly unaffected by the morning's drama. But how long could Jessica keep her daughter insulated from the danger and stress? How long could they impose on Frank's hospitality? What kind of life was she building for Emma in the midst of this century-old conflict? When Michael and Frank stepped outside to take a call from the tribal attorneys, Jessica joined Emma at the kitchen table. Her daughter was drawing their farmhouse, but not as it actually existed. In Emma's picture, the house was restored painted white surrounded by flowers. A child's vision of what could be untainted by knowledge of what lurked beneath the soil. Do you like staying here with Mr. Frank and Ms. Martha? Jessica kept her tone casual, watching her daughter's face. Emma nodded, adding details to her drawing. They're nice. Ms. Martha makes good cookies, and she's teaching me about horses. Jessica hesitated, then pressed on. Would you be okay if we stayed here longer? Or found another place to live? Somewhere that's not the farmhouse? Emma's crayon paused mid-stroke. She looked up, her expression serious beyond her years. Is this about the bad men who came this morning? And the treasure that made great-grandma sad? Jessica sometimes forgot how perceptive children could be, how they absorbed the emotional currents around them, even when adults tried to shield them. Yes, sweetie. The farmhouse isn't safe right now. There are people who want what's underneath it, people who might hurt us to get it. Emma considered this, her small face solemn. Then we should give it back to the people it belongs to. Like you said, the people who were there first. The simplicity of her daughter's moral compass brought tears to Jessica's eyes. Out of the mouths of babes came the clearest path forward. Not a legal strategy, not a financial calculation, but a simple recognition of right and wrong. We should give it back to the people it belongs to. Jessica made her decision that night, calling Michael to her room after Emma was asleep. I want to transfer the land to the Osage Nation, not after years of lawsuits, not as part of some settlement. Now, immediately, whatever it takes legally. Michael seemed taken aback by her directness. You're sure that land is worth millions, Jessica? The gold alone? The gold was payment for silence. Jessica's voice was firm. My grandmother refused it for 40 years. I can do the same. But you have Emma to think about. Michael's concern was genuine. A single mother with no home, no income, I'll figure something out. Jessica's determination was absolute. I want the land returned to its rightful owners. I want the Chambers family exposed for what they've done. I want justice for the Osage victims and for my grandmother. The money doesn't matter. Michael was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow. It won't be simple or quick. Property transfers never are. But we'll make it happen. Jessica slept soundly that night for the first time since finding the box beneath the chicken coop. The weight of decision had been lifted, replaced by the clarity of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats from Chambers and his allies. The legal battles would continue. The danger might even increase as Southwest grew more desperate. But the path forward was clear at last, not one of compromise or calculation, but of simple justice. In her dreams, Jessica stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, watching Emma play in a yard transformed from dust to green grass. Beside her stood an older woman, her face lined with years, but her eyes bright and familiar. Eleanor Morgan smiled at her granddaughter, no words needed between them. Two guardians of truth separated by time but united in purpose, finally completing the circle that had begun a century before. The county clerk's office hummed with the mundane business of small-town administration, a stark contrast to the weight of history about to unfold within its walls. Jessica studied the transfer documents spread across the conference table, each paragraph of legalese, an inadequate vessel for the century of injustice they were attempting to address. In moments, her signature would return stolen land to its rightful owners, completing a circle that had begun with murder and theft 100 years earlier. Michael Eagle stood beside her, his usually stoic demeanor softened with barely contained emotion. These weren't just papers to him. This was the culmination of generations of struggle, the answer to prayers his grandfather had whispered into Oklahoma winds long before Jessica was born. The tribal attorney across the table slid each document forward, methodically explaining the legal terminology with practiced efficiency. Once notarized and filed, the land returns to Osage stewardship, the attorney explained. Southwest can challenge it afterward, but the transfer itself will be complete. Frank Matthews positioned himself near the window, his ranger training evident in how he scanned the street below. He'd insisted on driving Jessica here himself, taking a circuitous route and switching vehicles at his friend's auto shop. Precautions that would have seemed excessive a week ago now felt necessary. Southwest resources were vast, their reach long, and Chambers had proven he would use every advantage at his disposal. Jessica signed her name a dozen times, each signature more confident than the last. With the final flourish of her pen, ownership of the 60 acres passed from her to the Osage Nation. The land that had been stolen through murder and fraud a century ago, that her grandmother had guarded for 40 years, had finally returned home. Michael reached across the table and took her hand, an uncharacteristic display of emotion from the reserved man. "My grandfather would have wept to see this day," he said, voice thick with feeling. "100 years we've fought for acknowledgement, for justice. This won't bring back those who were murdered, but it honors their memory." As they emerged from the county clerk's office, the bright Oklahoma sun momentarily blinded them after the fluorescent interior. Jessica blinked, adjusting to the light, and that's when she noticed the black SUV idling across the street. Through the windshield, she recognized the same security officer who had accompanied Chambers to Frank's ranch during the search. He made no attempt to hide, even nodding slightly when he caught Jessica's eye. Frank's posture shifted subtly, the movement so slight only someone watching for it would notice. "Let's not give them a show," he said casually, belying the tension in his frame as he guided Jessica toward his truck. "They know what we've done. Question is, what will they do about it?" The answer came before they even reached the highway. Frank's phone rang. Martha, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Men in Southwest uniforms are at our gate. They say they have legal documents to serve. I told them no one was home, but they're not leaving." Frank's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Stay inside, doors locked. I'm calling Sheriff Patterson. He owes me a favor, and he's no friend of Delaney's. Then call Ed and Jim in the barn apartment. Tell them what's happening." Jessica's stomach knotted with anxiety. Emma was at the ranch, potentially in danger because of decisions Jessica had made. "What kind of documents? What do they want?" "Probably an emergency court order challenging the land transfer," Frank said, accelerating down a back road toward his ranch. "Chambers must have had a judge on standby, ready to sign whatever they put in front of him the minute we filed." Michael, following in his own vehicle, called with confirmation. "Judge Harmon just issued a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets related to the disputed property. They're claiming the transfer was fraudulent, done to avoid legal judgments in their defamation suit." Jessica felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. The irony was rich. Southwest accusing her of legal trickery when their entire business model depended on manipulating the system. But irony provided cold comfort, with Emma potentially in danger with Chambers' men at Frank's gate, with the machinery of corrupt power grinding into motion against them. When they arrived at the ranch, Sheriff Patterson's cruiser was already there, positioned between Frank's gate and the Southwest vehicles. Patterson himself stood talking with the security officers, his posture relaxed but authoritative. As Frank approached, the sheriff turned with evident relief. "Been trying to explain to these gentlemen that serving papers requires proper identification, proper documentation of who they're serving, and proof they're authorized process servers," Patterson said. "Seems they're a bit confused about how the law works around here." The Southwest men were clearly frustrated, their faces showing the strain of men accustomed to intimidation being met with legal roadblocks. One held up a document folder. "We have a valid court order that needs immediate service." Sheriff Patterson's smile never reached his eyes. "Then you can give it to me, and I'll ensure it reaches the proper parties. After I've verified its authenticity with the court, of course. That could take a few hours, maybe even till tomorrow, given how backed up the system is." The standoff continued for several tense minutes before the Southwest men retreated to their vehicles, clearly calling for instructions. Jessica used the opportunity to hurry inside, where she found Emma contentedly helping Martha bake cookies, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding outside. The sight of her daughter's flour-dusted face, innocent and happy, renewed Jessica's determination. This was why she'd chosen justice over money, truth over expedience. So Emma would grow up understanding that some principles couldn't be compromised, some wrongs had to be righted regardless of personal cost. Sheriff Patterson entered the house a few minutes later, a sealed envelope in hand. "They've left for now, but they'll be back with reinforcements. Proper process servers, maybe even Delaney himself. This buys you a few hours at most." He handed the envelope to Jessica. "Emergency injunction freezing all assets related to the land pending resolution of Southwest's claims against you. Judge Harmon's signature as expected." Frank examined the document, his expression darkening. "Harmon's been in Chambers' pocket 4 years. Takes his family on hunting trips at Chambers' private lodge, gets campaign donations from Southwest subsidiaries. This injunction is legally questionable, but it'll stick until we can get it before a different judge. Jessica's heart sank. Does this mean the land transfer isn't valid? Michael, who had joined them in the kitchen, shook his head. The transfer is completed and recorded. This injunction might freeze any proceeds from the transfer or even allow for later invalidation under certain circumstances, but the land itself now legally belongs to the Osage Nation. The tribal attorney is already filing for a hearing to vacate the injunction, Patterson added, and I've spoken with the FBI field office in Oklahoma City. They're interested in the evidence you've uncovered, particularly anything suggesting a connection between the historical Osage murders and current corporate activities. For the first time since discovering the box beneath the chicken coop, Jessica felt the momentum shifting in their favor. The machinery of justice, so long stalled by money and influence, was beginning to turn. Yet the danger remained. Chambers had too much at stake to surrender easily, too many resources at his disposal to accept defeat. That evening, gathered around Frank's kitchen table, they planned their next moves. Michael had already arranged for tribal lawyers to file an emergency appeal with the federal district court, arguing that Judge Harmon's order infringed on tribal sovereignty. Frank contacted former colleagues at the Department of Interior, where investigations into historical mishandling of Native American lands had gained momentum in recent years. Southwest got their next move planned already, Frank said, studying his tablet. Sheriff Delaney delivered this an hour ago. He slid a document across the table. Judge Harmon has officially invalidated the land transfer as a fraudulent attempt to avoid legal liability. He's ordered the property returned to your ownership and effective immediately, Jessica. Can he do that? Jessica asked, stunned by the audacity. Just erase a completed property transfer. It exceeds his authority, Michael said, scanning the order. A state judge can't unilaterally invalidate a transfer to a sovereign tribal nation. But until a higher court overrules him, this order stands. That's not all, Frank continued grimly. Southwest's been granted an emergency exploration permit based on their mineral rights claims. They're scheduled to begin work tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Jessica felt the victory of the morning evaporate. Within 12 hours, Southwest would be on the land drilling core samples, extracting uranium, desecrating what the Osage considered sacred ground, all with apparent legal blessing. The injustice burned in her throat, the bitter taste of a system still weighted toward power and money over truth and right. Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Jessica noticed something in Frank's expression, not defeat but calculation. The old ranger was already formulating a counter-strategy, already seeing paths forward where she saw only obstacles. Harmon overreached, Frank said, tapping the court order. This won't stand up to federal scrutiny, especially with the FBI now involved. But more importantly, he's given us an opening. If the land is legally yours again, even temporarily, you have property owner rights that Southwest has to respect. Jessica struggled to follow his logic. But they have an exploration permit. They can start drilling tomorrow. Frank's smile held no humor. Permits have requirements, safety protocols, environmental impact assessments, proper notification of adjacent landowners, public hearings in some cases. He pulled out his phone. I still know people at the Department of Interior. Let's find out exactly what Southwest permit allows and what it requires them to do. By midnight, a new strategy had emerged. Southwest permit was expedited but not unlimited. They were required to provide site safety plans, radiation monitoring, groundwater protection measures. They needed to notify all adjacent landowners, including Frank, whose property bordered the northeast corner of Jessica's farm. Most importantly, they could be held liable for any environmental contamination that spread beyond the property boundaries. We used their own system against them. Frank explained tactical mine-finding, leverage points in Southwest's apparently impenetrable legal position. Delay document demand oversight. Every step has to be by the book, every protocol followed exactly. The minute they cut corners, and they will, we have grounds for injunctions, EPA complaints, federal intervention. Michael nodded, adding another dimension to the strategy. Meanwhile, our emergency appeal to the federal court creates another front they have to defend. And there's something else. He glanced at his phone, which had just chimed with a notification. The Oklahoma Herald just published an online story, Historical Evidence Links Energy CEO to Osage Murder Conspiracy. He turned his phone to show them the headline. The article carefully avoided mentioning the current land dispute or Southwest, directly focusing instead on historical revelations, but the implications were unmistakable. The tribal council made this decision independently, Michael said, answering their unspoken question. When I delivered the evidence, it became part of the tribal record. Judge Harmon's injunction doesn't apply to them. They weren't named in it. A clever use of the very sovereignty that had been violated a century ago, now deployed to expose the truth about that violation. Jessica felt a surge of hope. The first domino had fallen and others would follow. Truth had a momentum of its own once unleashed, a power that even the most influential couldn't indefinitely contain. They were up before dawn preparing to meet Southwest at the farm. Frank contacted his network of former rangers, strategically positioning them on his property adjacent to Jessica's land. Michael brought 2 tribal attorneys with radiation expertise. Patterson arranged for a county environmental inspector to be present, citing concerns about groundwater contamination. As the sun crested the horizon, Jessica, Frank, and Michael were already positioned at the farm, legally present as the property owner and her guests. They set up just beyond the chicken coop with cameras, radiation detectors borrowed from a university contact of Michael's, and the documentation they would need to ensure Southwest's compliance with every regulation. When the Southwest vehicles arrived at 6:45 a.m., 3 drilling trucks, several SUVs with security personnel, and a mobile command center, they found their intended worksite already occupied. Victor Chambers himself emerged from the lead vehicle, his composed corporate demeanor visibly strained as he approached Jessica. "This is pointless obstruction, Ms. Morgan," he said, gesturing toward the drilling equipment being unloaded nearby. "We have legal authorization to conduct exploration activities. You're only delaying the inevitable." Jessica met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from Frank and Michael's presence beside her. "And we're not obstructing anything. As the legal owner of this property, I'm simply exercising my right to monitor activities that could potentially impact the environment and my daughter's health." She held up a document. "I believe your permit requires you to maintain a detailed site safety log. We'd like to review that before you begin." One of the tribal attorneys stepped forward, introducing himself and requesting copies of Southwest's radiation management protocols, groundwater protection plan, and liability insurance documentation. Frank asked pointed questions about drilling depth containment measures and emergency procedures in case of radioactive material exposure. Michael silently filmed every interaction, creating a record that could prove valuable in future legal proceedings. Each question, each documentation request, each safety concern raised was technically legitimate. All things Southwest was required to address under their permit conditions. But collectively, they created exactly the friction Frank had envisioned, slowing the operation to a crawl as managers scrambled to produce the required paperwork, adjust protocols to meet objections, and navigate the unexpected scrutiny. By 10 a.m., drilling had yet to begin. Chambers paced near the command center phone, pressed to his ear, clearly seeking higher intervention to remove the obstacles Jessica and her allies had created. When he returned, his confident smile was back. Never a good sign. "Sheriff Delaney will be arriving shortly to ensure our work can proceed without interference," he announced. "I suggest you reconsider your approach, Ms. Morgan. Obstruction of a legally permitted operation could have consequences beyond today." The threat was thinly veiled, but Jessica stood her ground. "We're not obstructing anything. We're ensuring compliance with permit requirements. Your own documentation states that core samples must be properly contained and logged to prevent contamination. We're simply here to witness that those protocols are being followed." The standoff continued as the morning stretched toward noon, tension building with each hour of delay, costing Southwest thousands in equipment and personnel time. When Sheriff Delaney finally arrived, he seemed uncomfortable with the role Chambers expected him to play, enforcing private corporate interests against reasonable safety concerns raised by a property owner. The situation escalated when one of Frank's radiation detectors registered an anomalous reading near where Southwest technicians were preparing a drilling site. The tribal attorney immediately requested work be halted until the source could be identified and contained, a reasonable safety precaution that Chambers vehemently opposed. "There's no danger," he insisted, dismissal categorical. "Our equipment is state-of-the-art. Our protocols exceed federal requirements. This is just another delay tactic." The sheriff, caught between corporate pressure and legitimate safety concerns, made a decision that surprised everyone. Until we can verify there's no radiation risk, I think it's best if operations pause. He turned to Chambers, his expression firmer than before. My responsibility is public safety, sir. That includes workers on this site. Chambers' face darkened with barely suppressed rage, but before he could respond, new vehicles appeared on the access road. Two unmarked government SUVs that Jessica immediately recognized as FBI. The agents who had interviewed her the previous day emerged accompanied by what appeared to be technical specialists carrying equipment cases. The lead agent approached, nodding to Jessica before addressing Chambers directly. Mr. Chambers, we have a federal warrant to inspect this site in connection with an ongoing investigation. All activities need to cease immediately. The warrant presented to both Chambers and Sheriff Delaney covered not just the farm, but all Southwest equipment and documentation present. The FBI team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area, documenting the scene, interviewing Southwest personnel. What had been Chambers' show of force transformed within minutes into a federal crime scene. The warrant covers potential violations of environmental regulations, securities fraud related to undisclosed liabilities, and witness intimidation. The agent explained, voice matter of fact, as Southwest employees were directed away from their equipment. We'll need access to all drilling plans, soil samples, and corporate communications related to this site. Jessica watched Chambers' carefully constructed world begin to crumble around him. The FBI wasn't just investigating historical crimes. They were examining current corporate practices, financial disclosures, environmental compliance. The evidence Jessica had provided had opened doors to scrutiny Chambers had likely never anticipated. As the morning turned to afternoon, more federal vehicles arrived. EPA investigators, Department of Interior officials, even representatives from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission concerned about the handling of uranium samples. Southwest's drilling operation, meant to quickly extract evidence of the deposit's value, had instead attracted precisely the regulatory attention Chambers had spent decades avoiding. The irony wasn't lost on Jessica. In his desperate attempt to secure the uranium deposit, Chambers had triggered exactly the oversight he'd feared. His shortcuts, his threats, his manipulation of local officials had worked when dealing with individuals, but against the federal government, those same tactics created vulnerability. By late afternoon, Southwest personnel were withdrawing their equipment, remaining under FBI custody, their operations suspended indefinitely pending multiple investigations. Chambers himself departed under escort, his phone and laptop seized as potential evidence, his corporate armor finally pierced by the truth Jessica's grandmother had preserved for 40 years. Frank watched the procession of vehicles, leaving satisfaction evident in his weathered face. Chambers forgot the first rule of power: don't get too big for your britches. The bigger you are, the harder the government looks at you when things go sideways. Will it stick? Jessica asked, watching the last Southwest truck disappear down the access road. All these investigations, the evidence, will it actually change anything? Some of it will stick, Michael said. The federal government doesn't like being made a fool of, and Chambers has been playing games with regulatory filings for years. But more importantly, the truth about the Osage murders will finally be acknowledged. That's what my grandfather wanted more than anything. Recognition that these weren't just tragedies, they were crimes orchestrated and covered up by powerful men. Standing on her grandmother's porch as the sun began its descent, Jessica felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also exhaustion, relief, and an odd sense of emptiness. The battle that had consumed her life since inheriting the farm was shifting to courtrooms and federal offices, moving beyond her direct involvement. The land would eventually return to Osage control once the legal challenges to Judge Harmon's order worked through the system. The truth about the Osage murders and the Chambers family's involvement would finally be fully acknowledged. But what came next for her and Emma? The farm wasn't habitable, contaminated by decades of uranium exposure, and now a federal investigation site. The gold remained in FBI custody as evidence. Jessica had given up a fortune in principle, but gained no security for her daughter's future in return. As if reading her thoughts, Michael approached where she stood on the porch. The tribal council met this morning, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. They've authorized me to offer you a position at our cultural center, developing educational programs about this land's history, what happened here, the connection between our peoples. Jessica blinked in surprise. I don't have any qualifications for something like that. Michael's smile was gentle. You have the most important qualification. You lived this story. You chose justice over personal gain. You helped return stolen land to its rightful caretakers. His gesture encompassed the farm, the ancient oak, the chicken coop that had hidden secrets for so long. This place has shaped both our families for generations. Who better to help others understand its lessons? The position included modest housing near the cultural center and educational opportunities for Emma at the tribal school. It wasn't wealth, wasn't the financial security the uranium deposit might have provided, but it offered something perhaps more valuable: purpose, community, a chance to be part of healing rather than exploitation. We need people who can bridge worlds, Michael continued. Someone who understands both sides of this history. My people respect what you did, Jessica, what Eleanor did before you. You both stood guard over this land when you could have profited from it. That means something to us. Frank joined them on the porch, his face showing satisfaction at the day's outcome. It's a good offer, he said simply. A fresh start for you and Emma. Would you come visit? Jessica asked, suddenly realizing how important Frank had become to them in such a short time. The unexpected guardian angel who had watched over Eleanor and now extended that protection to her granddaughter and great-granddaughter. Try and stop me, Frank replied with a square smile. Someone's got to teach that little girl how to ride a horse properly. He'd already promised to help them move to remain the loyal friend he'd been to Eleanor during her long vigil. Three unlikely allies brought together by buried secrets, now bound by shared purpose and hard-won victory. As the last federal vehicles departed, Jessica took a final walk around the property that had been briefly hers, that would soon return permanently to Osage stewardship. The chicken coop stood open and empty, its hidden compartment now exposed, its secrets revealed. The old oak tree, bearing the scars of its hidden cavity, still spread ancient branches against the Oklahoma sky. The uranium and gold would stay buried, protected now by federal mandate, rather than one woman's solitary vigil. She paused at the oak tree, running her fingers over the symbols carved into its trunk decades ago. Osage protections for the dead, Michael had explained. Beneath this tree lay her grandfather, a man whose greed had cost him everything. Yet his death had set in motion Eleanor's 40-year guardianship, which led eventually to Jessica's inheritance and the final return of the land to its rightful owners. There was symmetry in it, a balance restored after generations of imbalance. The soil beneath her feet held more than minerals and bones. It held stories that deserved telling, truths that deserved acknowledgement. Eleanor had protected those truths in silence. Jessica would honor them through sharing, through education, through bringing light to what had been kept in darkness for too long. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Emma ran to join her, taking her mother's hand as they walked. The child had shown remarkable resilience through all the upheaval, adapting to each new situation with the flexibility of youth. What happens now? Emma asked, her question containing no worry, only curiosity about the next chapter. Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand, finding the right words to explain their future. We start again, she said, watching the golden light transform the weathered farmhouse into something almost beautiful. Not from nothing, but from truth. We'll help tell the story of this place, of your great-grandmother, of the people who were here before us. We become part of something bigger than ourselves. The simplicity of it settled over them both as they walked back toward Frank's waiting truck. Not wealth, not power, but purpose. Not possession, but stewardship. Not isolation, but community. 2 weeks later, Jessica stood before a small audience at the Osage Cultural Center, nervously adjusting the microphone. The tribal council had organized a ceremony to mark the official return of the land, and Jessica had been asked to speak about her grandmother's role in its story. Emma sat in the front row beside Frank and Martha, beaming with pride as her mother addressed the gathering. My grandmother, Eleanor Morgan, stood guard over that land for 40 years. Jessica began, finding her voice growing stronger with each word. She chose loneliness over profit, silence over comfort, duty over ease. For decades, I thought she'd abandoned us, chosen ghosts over family. Now I understand she was protecting us, preserving not just minerals in the ground, but truth that needed to wait for its proper time. She looked around the room at the faces of Osage elders who had waited generations for this acknowledgement, at Michael, whose grandfather's confrontation with her grandfather had set this circle in motion, at Frank, whose quiet vigilance had extended Eleanor's protection to a new generation. There are debts that can never be fully repaid, she continued, wrongs that can never be completely righted. But acknowledgement is where healing begins. My grandmother knew that. She kept watch so that someday when the time was right, the truth could emerge and the land could return to those from whom it was stolen. After the ceremony, as people mingled over refreshments, Jessica found herself drawn to a display case near the entrance. Inside was a familiar object, the porcelain doll Emma had found at the farm, its cracked face and faded red velvet dress carefully preserved behind glass. Beside it lay a photograph of Eleanor as a young woman standing proudly before the farmhouse in its prime. The exhibit label read simply, "Guardian of Truth." Eleanor Morgan protected this land and its secrets for 40 years, ensuring justice would eventually prevail. Jessica felt a presence beside her and turned to find an elderly Osage woman studying her face. "I knew your grandmother," the woman said softly. "We all thought she was just a strange white woman who wanted to be left alone. None of us knew she was standing watch over our ancestors' bones, over our stolen heritage." "I wish I had known her better," Jessica admitted. The woman nodded. "But you knew her heart. You made the same choice she did when you could have chosen differently. That tells me you knew the most important part of her." As they prepared to leave, Emma tugged at Jessica's hand, pointing to a wall where construction had begun on a new exhibit space. "What's going there, Mom?" Michael, overhearing, answered for her. "That's where we'll tell the whole story. The Osage murders, the stolen land, Eleanor's guardianship, and your mother's choice to return what was taken. We're calling it The Circle Completed." That night in their new home near the cultural center, Jessica tucked Emma into bed in a room that didn't leak or sag, in a house that had electricity and running water and neighbors within shouting distance. Such simple comforts, yet they felt like luxury after the decaying farmhouse. "Are you sad we didn't keep the treasure?" Emma asked sleepily, the question coming out of nowhere as children's questions often do. Jessica considered the gold now in FBI custody, the uranium deposit worth hundreds of millions that would remain forever buried. "No," she said truthfully. "Some treasures cost too much. They made great-grandma Eleanor sad for 40 years. I'd rather have what we have now, friends, purpose, a place we belong." Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Me too. And Mr. Frank says I can start writing lessons next week." As her daughter drifted towards sleep, Jessica stood at the window looking out at the stars over Osage land. She thought of Eleanor, standing guard alone for decades, and felt a connection across time. Grandmother to granddaughter, guardian to storyteller. Eleanor had preserved the truth. Jessica would share it. Eleanor had protected in isolation. Jessica would honor through community. The circle was complete. The land had returned to its rightful caretakers. The truth had emerged from darkness into light. And Jessica Morgan, who had inherited a worthless farm and a buried secret, had found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Not wealth or security, but purpose, belonging, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done right by her grandmother's legacy. Eleanor Morgan had guarded the land's secrets for 40 years. Jessica and Emma would help share its truths for generations to come.